Okay. So a lot of you maybe had time to discuss with Jaap. So he's one of the few law enforcement in this meeting. I've met Jaap a certain number of years ago. I can't remember. And he's been working at Europol on cybercrime for a number of years. Before EC3 was created this year, so he has a wealth of experience, and he accepted to come and share with you a number of the projects Europol has around how we can take action against botnets, answer to some of the questions that were asked actually today and yesterday about what is law enforcement doing and so on, and maybe give some clues about where we're going. So thank you, Jaap.
Thank you very much, Eric. So if I look at my title, Law Enforcement Action Against Botnets, that's almost a contradictio in terminus, I think, or I hear a lot of times. Nevertheless, I hope to take you all with me on a story about the perspective of law enforcement in the fight against botnets, and perhaps I can even change that notion. Let's see. Well, as said, I'm Jaap van Os. I actually started in cybercrime in 1996, and I always felt not like a crusader, but more like a missionary, trying to explain that law enforcement should also fight cybercrime and not only do forensic examinations, for example. I think we've reached the point where now cybercrime is very well on the agenda, and we also reached the point that we should cooperate more. And I'll try to show you why. Okay. So far, another notion that we get sometimes is that when you bring information to the police, it will just be dropped in a black hole and you will never see anything back again. Huh? And I also try to change that notion. But part of it is true, because we are particularly fond of keeping our information to ourselves. In this case, that's all your information, because we don't have any visibility on the infrastructure, on the botnets itself. We need to get that from you, amongst others. Another notion I had, and it was the speaker before, Paul said, there aren't that many arrests. Yes, that's true. I also think that there aren't that many arrests. And I think there are a lot more takedowns, a lot more disruption, but we lack in arrests, and I think we should work on that. An example of that, of such an arrest, is, of course, alleged arrest, is the arrest of Punch in Russia and his team, something that already passed by, and we are still speculating over whether that arrest is formally claimed or not. Nevertheless, it sounds like he is at least off the streets for the time being. It also indicates that we don't know that much more about such a situation as you all do, meaning that we also have to build relationships as law enforcement, not only with industry, but also with countries where we should cooperate, and with law enforcement in those countries. That's another challenge we are looking at. Another threat, thanks to malware must die once again, the crypto locker. Right now, a lot of our work at the European Cybercrime Center, which I will explain a bit later on, is on police ransomware and malware-driven banking attacks. So exactly a topic being discussed here for quite some time. Right now, we all see the crypto locker becoming a problem. And the first investigations have been started, and the first frustrations also in trying to deal with it it's also the frustration of command and control being taken down, but then the crypto locker being distributed elsewhere. It indicates the problems we are facing, whether we want to investigate this issue and try to do our job as law enforcement, but also as the internet community as we are here. So those are the trending topics, and they are the examples of the botnets that are being used today. But what's new? I think this is one of, in 2005 actually, this is Detox, one of the earlier botnet criminals. In 2005, the investigation started in 2004 in the Netherlands. He created the ToxBot. He wanted to call it Detox by his nick, but nevertheless the AV industry called it ToxBot. And you can clearly see here what his motivation is to do such a thing. And that's also reflected in our work. You can also clearly see that botnets are not new. It started somewhere in the beginning of the 2000s. What was quite significant here is that we at that point arrested the guy and were worried because the botnet was still running. And at that point in time we arrested the guy, and it was later on sinkholed by Access for All at that point in time. So a good combination. Nowadays, I think it's the other way around. We are sinkholing, we are taking down botnets, but we forget to arrest the criminals. And the action remains a bit ineffective. So that's an important notion we learned. Another thing I think we learned by that time was that these criminals were really beginners and pioneering. The guy, Detox, was so proud of his piece of malware he created that he had the copyright written into the code and a referral to his nickname, which is of course not very good. It's probably good to protect your malware, but not very good for a cyber criminal business point of view. The other thing I think that's interesting already by that time is what are the kind of crimes you lay on such a person. And the crimes at that point are, he is convicted for hacking, so not for malware distribution, but for hacking and endangering the financial services of the Netherlands, at least. So quite specific crimes, but not something that you would think of immediately. Although, of course, computer intrusion in botnets is a large-scale computer intrusion. It's large-scale hacking. You could see it that way. The ToxBot and Detox, first big case, and now I think we're about 8-9 years later, and we are still faced with these damn botnets. Okay, but first of all, I'm representing the European Cybercrime Center that's hosted at Europol. We started in January, and I have to also take you or give you the perspective of how this is established. The fight against cybercrime is somehow established in the EU. And I think that we are all familiar or have heard of the Cybercrime Convention that was drafted 2001, and it's something that we take as the basis for a lot of what law enforcement does, not only at a European level, but in member states and across the globe. That is basically the basis of the fight against cybercrime from a law enforcement perspective. But then, right now, being a missionary for quite some time, we can see that it somehow worked, because we have an EU cyber security strategy for an open and safe and secure cyberspace. But it specifically mentions that we should establish a European Cybercrime Center. It also speaks about the cooperation. It also speaks about botnets itself, that they should be somehow criminalized, which I don't know if that is a good idea or not, but at least there is the attention to do that. We have a very specific directive in the EU on attacks against information systems. And one thing botnets do is attacking our information systems. It is really speaking about botnet attacks in the text. So we somehow tried, at least at an EU level, we managed to pass a message that something should be done. We tabled it, and somehow we also got the policymakers to think about how they could tackle botnets and how they could help us. And then the third thing that I should mention is tackling digital crime in our digital age, and that is basically establishing my job, because it's establishing the European Cybercrime Center. Started this January, and I'm the team leader cybercrime in the operations department there. The specific thing is we were already coordinating investigations and supporting member states in cybercrime investigations. Nevertheless, the assignment we had was to be better able to tackle cybercrime in the EU. And through cooperation with the third community, with the antivirus industry, with the academia, so with you guys. And that is the assignment. Nevertheless, there are loads of hindrances to be taken, and I'll mention a few of them later on. Okay, what do we do in the European Cybercrime Center? What's our mandate? And that is basically, first of all, like the rest of Europol, we are somehow supporting the fight against serious and organized crime. In our case, against serious and organized cybercrime, meaning our job is to map out the cybercriminal groups that are active in Europe, from Europe, through Europe, or partially affecting Europe. That is our task. And because they are creating apparently large criminal profits, the majority of our work is like financially driven cybercrime. Nevertheless, we can do other things. I leave out child sexual exploitation on the internet, which is another specific entry in our mandate, but that's not relevant here, I think. The other one in our mandate that is relevant is this one. And it's also a new one. Following the EU policy, we are there to prevent, or at least to respond to cyber attacks. Cyber attacks affecting critical infrastructure, and cyber attacks attacking information systems in the EU. So basically, all the cyber attacks can be done by, or should be done by, the EC3. To me, a bank attack, yeah. Very good question. I think the definition of information systems is here rather referring to the large network that we use to govern the European Union. Okay. But per se, I think you're correct. It should also include your information system. Being an EU citizen, I assume. Nevertheless, we have to look into serious and organized cybercrime, which means that we probably not immediately take a complaint from you, but we will try to fight it on a higher level. Okay, to me, a bank attack with a banking Trojan through Zeus or Spire or Citadel botnet is an attack on critical infrastructure. Also, the denial of service attacks we saw specifically in the Netherlands recently that would take down some of the banks in the Netherlands for a couple of hours is, to me, an attack on critical infrastructure. They both use botnets, and that means that we are trying to find out, to map out the criminals who use them, the ones behind them. And that is a kind of tough job. Okay, so what's the EC3? In a few words, basically our assignment is to be the information hub in the EU on cybercrime. meaning that now not only we would receive information from our peers in the computer crime units in the member states and support their investigations, but we should also tap into other sources on the internet, in academia, from the AV industry, to be able to better fight cybercrime. That is, I think, also why I'm glad to be here, because I feel that there is a lot of information already in this room that is not being exploited enough to be able to have law enforcement action undertaken immediately. And I know that you are crying for that, so let's try to make that happen. We don't see cybercrime as an individual crime. We basically look at those cybercriminal groups or individuals that run a cybercriminal business. And I think it has been mentioned before already that this business is rarely run by one cybercriminal alone. The lone hacker might be still out there, but he is not running our botnets, and he's not running the adware scams. He's not doing the e-banking attacks on its own. They have been specialized. They all have their roles, and the business somehow makes it possible that you can specialize as a developer, as a campaign runner, as a money launderer, whatever you do. To be quick, I think this model is already quite old. In general, it works. The cyber criminals we're looking at are building their instruments. They are building their botnets. They are creating malware, basically to build an infrastructure so they can commit credential or information theft. They will use the information to trade or to do scams or to attack banks, and they finally want to do something with their money, and they want to get their bitcoins exchanged for real money so they can buy the big black SUVs in the end and do their partying. That is all served by the underground economy. We all know that. All the forums where they would trade stolen goods, the information, the malware, the tools, the communication platforms, the Java service they use to exchange information on their jobs, to exchange drops, to exchange config files. Everything happens somehow in that underground economy. Very important for us as law enforcement is that we feel that we should have visibility on the infrastructure, on the money laundering part and networks, and on the underground economy in order to have a good enough information position to be able to map out the criminals and finally arrest them. Okay, in EC3 we do have an instrument that is specifically geared towards these kinds of crimes, so the hacking, the malware, the botnets, the identity theft, and that's what we call focal point cyber. That is basically, it's not only a database, but the thing is, on an EU level, we can store information about that criminals. And then you say, okay, that's strange, you can store information. Yes, but we can officially store, it's regulated, personal data of criminals, which is quite important because it is not that straightforward that you can store information on criminals. We can, but we're not only a database, we are a team of analysts and specialists in this area that basically try to map out these criminals, support cybercrime investigations in the member states, and then using the analyzed material to basically initiate cross-border investigations or takedowns or disruptions, whatever we feel possible. And that is what we are supposed to do. Since the EC3 is growing quite rapidly, but I must say that our work is growing even more rapidly. And I'm sure that with all the information that's going to come from this room, that we are going to be overbooked for the next couple of months. Okay, this is in 2010, I think. At that point in time, if we start looking a bit more at the infrastructure part, at the botnets itself, in 2010 you will still have criminal groups using one malware to basically conduct their business, to do their scams, to do their e-banking attacks. Now that has completely changed. Nevertheless, the process still remains the same. But if you look at what we have nowadays, then you would have the developers using their machines, their networks. You would have traffickers using botnets or other machines to generate traffic. You would have the cryptors that would do the encryption or the packing for you. The exploiters running the exploit kits and making sure the botnets are being built. You will have the bulletproof hosters, and whether that's a botnet or any other structure. You would have the botnets itself, the proxies, the command and control, the drops, the mule databases, and you would have the botnets that would do the mining for you. So that is somehow a mixture of roles and somehow also a mixture of infrastructure that is being used to deploy a Trojan or a piece of malware. This also gives you quite a good overview on where you could intervene. And I think as law enforcement, we are now working towards identifying key players, but also key services that we would be able to somehow focus more on and try to disrupt by taking down the services rather than the complete process alone. Nevertheless, our goal as law enforcement in the end is to have criminal arrests, because we think that is in basis our job to investigate crimes and to get the criminals behind bars. So only the infrastructure vision is very important for us. We can identify the services we are after, and but nevertheless, the goal is not only disrupting infrastructure. Good. Nevertheless, we all know, and we learned that through these days here, infrastructure is key. The criminal infrastructure is where we are all looking at. It's what we as researchers, intelligence agencies, industry experts, hackers, bloggers, it's where we, the part that we explore, that we investigate, that we hack into, that we are somehow involved with. So we've got altogether, I think we should have quite a good visibility on the infrastructure, on what's happening. And I think that has been shown already in this 1.5 days, that a lot of the botnets are quite well known and are quite well structured, and the information position on them is good. Why I put law enforcement in brackets is that, of course, we suspect that there are law enforcement officers somewhere on this infrastructure active, but I don't want to go into that. But I think in general, law enforcement does not have the ability to look into the infrastructure and to obtain that way the information. And that is a bit different than beforehand, when you would investigate a murder or another type of traditional crime. We need the information on that infrastructure to be able to map out the criminals. Of course, the infrastructure causes victims of all kinds, whether it's corporations, or whether it's infected consumer machines. That's what it's also providing insight in. And it's served by providers of all kinds. I mean, it's not all bad. There are legitimate providers who somehow maintain the infrastructure. Nevertheless, they are important in knowing what's going on there. And then we have the criminals. And as I told you, it's a number of different ones, but basically we can call them the cyber criminals, the coders, the trackers, the ones that are, using that infrastructure to deploy the malware they create, to build their botnets, to create traffic. They use it to host their badness. They also use it to cash out, to make their digital money into real money. They use it to build their money mule networks. So yes, in our work, that should be key. And I think we have a good vision on it. Nevertheless, and it's going to be shown later on also, I think if we only take down infrastructure or parts of infrastructure, we continue to be frustrated because it's not going to help, because the criminals will just continue. They will switch their command and control, they will switch their networks, they will deploy other infrastructure, and they will continue to work. So we should have, and that's, I think, basically my message already, we should disrupt, have an information position on the infrastructure, but we should also be able to use that information to map out the criminals and do everything we can to get them behind bars. Okay. But that's easier said than done. And I think I've also explained to people around the room, there are a lot of challenges as law enforcement. We work in multiple jurisdictions. Everybody knows that our laws are somehow harmonized, but they're a bit different in every country. We have prosecutors that will have jurisdiction in their country, meaning that internationally or cross-border is a completely different story. That is a fact of life, and that is something we should deal with. So there is a need for cross-border coordination, but it is not very easy to be able in 1 week time to get a number of countries up and running in order to do a takedown. And you need also to have the information position to tell them why you would need that cross-border coordination. We in this room, I think, have a lot of information. We even might say we've got a lot of intelligence on the infrastructure, on the botnets we have. But that's different from having evidence. Having evidence that the criminals created malware, used it to use infrastructure to deploy and distribute it, to attack a bank, and that there were victims which money was transferred and was cashed out later on somewhere in Eastern Europe, for example. To evidence that, you need to do thorough investigations, and they are not investigations you do in 2 or 3 days. It will take you months to build up. It also means that if you want to have coordinated action, that you will have to be patient for some time. Action versus investigation. A takedown is quite rapidly done. An investigation, as I say, will take more time. So how to align that? That's a challenge for us. The legality, we have to work according to the rules, to the law. For example, I think that in the Netherlands now they are discussing whether law enforcement should be able to hack or counter-hack the criminals. Very interesting discourse, but so far we cannot hack. It also means that if we would receive information that has been gotten through a hack, that it will be difficult for us to turn that into evidential material. Another challenge. Monitoring botnets. For us, it's difficult to monitor. For us, for law enforcement, it's difficult to monitor botnets. I think in private industry or in academia, that's much more easy. Nevertheless, we need that somehow, that vision on the infrastructure. I think that's clear. We have a lot of protocols already defining how to exchange information. But nevertheless, there is this notion that we should be able to cooperate. It means that we, law enforcement, and you should be able to exchange information to build that information position. But it's not that straightforward to be able to do that. So we have to now be creative to arrange that, and we probably have to change those protocols. And that are the challenges that are somehow from an organizational or legal nature. Then there is the technical challenges like the resilience of a botnet. the ability of criminals to rapidly change their modus operandi, those kind of things. Okay, but there is law enforcement action. There has been. The Toxvold case was one of many, I think. It also ended in arrest, so that's good. We also had, and I think they've been discussed, the Bedelab case in 2010, Dutch police, large botnet, taken down and criminal arrested, quite a famous case. The core flood takedown by the FBI, so there are examples. There is even this example of the Citadel takedown that Microsoft initiated in July or something, which was probably more their initiative, and law enforcement, you know, got engaged because they somehow had to, because it's their job. Nevertheless, the Citadel botnet is up and running again. It means that the criminals are still out there, and I think we should further reform our crusade in order to map them out and to basically arrest them. And to start to end this with, also a show of law enforcement action. The zero access botnet, it's been discussed, although I think it was in the top 5 of the ACDC project. Nevertheless, it was not. It didn't get much recognition in the room here, I believe. Nevertheless, we can say that it is a very irritating and noisy botnet. I think we got contacted, let's say, last week, a couple of days ago, once again by Microsoft. And yesterday, while we were speaking and discussing here, Microsoft, in cooperation actually with European Cybercrime Center, but nevertheless with 5 countries, took down or disrupted the fraud control of the supernodes of that botnet here in Europe. At 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, the 18 supernodes at that time of the botnet were taken down, and a lot of the domains were taken down in the US. It is a show of quite good cooperation and that it can somehow work. It also quite exceptional that we managed in a very short time, because also this time we got a little bit more notice, but still it was only a couple of days we had to arrange those takedowns. This is a success, or I should say a partial success, because the criminals switched their infrastructure, and right now the click fraud is running again. That means one thing: we didn't arrest the criminals, so we should continue our crusade. And I would say the saga will be continued, and we have to keep on hunting and to be able to disrupt, take down, but also to arrest. And I hope with that I've given you a little flavor of what we try to do in law enforcement and why we need you. So thank you for your attention, and also thanking the organization for inviting me here and for their excellent taste in color.
Questions? Yes.
It's all right, Eric. I just wanted to run up here. I have no question. Now, Jaap.
Yeah.
What are the realistic jail terms we're looking at for botnet masters? Is it depend on the region they're from, jurisdiction? Like, are we talking about 2 years suspended, or is it a real kind of time in jail?
It depends a lot on which countries. I think in the US the punishment is much more severe. It also depends on which crimes they are being trialed for. And as I tried to indicate, it's not immediately straightforward which crime you commit when you use a botnet. And people earlier said, you know, botnet mining, is that a crime, of Bitcoin mining, is that a crime or not? I think the earlier sentences were quite low, like under a year. I think Detox got under a year of jail time. Right now they're a bit more severe, but nevertheless, I think they could be steeper, but the examples of successful cases and examples of how you can trial cyber criminals and on which crimes, there are only a few. So I think that is somehow evolving.
Okay, how's the EC will handle a case of the botnet, which is using the crime model, which is using the botnet itself as a service to spread the other criminals malware, for example? How can we make a case for the scheme like that?
Yeah, I think it's not. It's evident that there could be a case in the situation that you described. Nevertheless, the challenge here is to align law enforcement first to receive the information in a way they can work with it, and the other one is to have to be able to set up that cross-border team with prosecution and all to be able to conduct the investigation. And then questions like capacity, cooperation, jurisdiction will come into play. I think it can be done. I think also the action we did yesterday is a show that action can be undertaken. It's just not as straightforward as it seems, because it's those investigations are very capacity intensive, and mainly they are across borders and jurisdictions.
Hi. It's very interesting that you talk about cooperation inside the EU, and there's a lot of developments that Europol is certainly taking care of that. But how would you evaluate international cooperation in general outside the EU? Because, I mean, there is the Budapest Convention, but it's quite outdated, and still, I mean, it was restricted to a couple countries and didn't really get along all over the world. So how would you envision this? Because, I mean, you may take care of that inside Europe, but the problem is much broader.
Okay, that's a very clear question, and I can only give you partial answers to that. We all know that, but nevertheless, I'll try to. Although I'm from the Netherlands, I'm European, I work for an EU agency. We do realize that cybercrime is globally, and we do cooperate with quite intensively with partners outside the EU, also with non-EU countries like Switzerland or Norway, but with the US, with the Americas, with Australia, we all have agreements with that to cooperate. So that's one part of it. The nature of cybercrime also has in itself that, for example, a lot of the badness that's happening in Europe comes from Eastern Europe, and we are still developing our relations with those countries. And for example, I think with Ukraine, we are already quite far ahead, so the cooperation is becoming quite good. With Russia, there are examples of good cooperation. Nevertheless, we should devote more attention to that in building that relationship in order to be effective. I cannot give you another answer than that. It's just there is a lot of willingness to do so, also on police level, on both sides of the border.
Sorry, we can't take any more questions because of the time. Thank you, Jaap.